Now, Brian put a footnote on this one. He's not sure if I should answer this one or not. And so I thought about whether or not I should answer it. You make fairly consistent references to God. Well, as an Irishman, the only time I can talk with my equals when I talk to God. Braveheart. Being a believer and things like that. Of what tradition are you coming out of? Coming out? It's kind of an odd. Okay, just curious. Glad to answer this question, Josh. But let me start off with a caveat first. I teach religious studies. I have a degree in religious education. I'm considered a very solid theologian, which are all three different worlds. So before I even answer it, I just want to make sure you know that I've traveled around the world and have had amazing moments with members of just about every faith tradition, including faith traditions very few people know much about. The Maronites, the Druze, those are just two Middle Eastern ones, various Islamic smaller groups. But I am a Roman Catholic, and I have a Catholic education, which means that I was taught to read great books. I was taught to defend my thoughts. I was taught to argue logically and reasonably. I'm expected to care for the poor, and in fact, that's one of my standards. It's called the preferential option for the poor, and you'll notice that the first thing when this virus hit, Brian and I both agreed that we need to lower our prices at the university so that more and more people could be on it at a cheaper rate. Some of the finest people I've ever met in my life are Roman Catholics. Some of the worst human beings I've ever met in my life are Roman Catholics. I am proud of many things about my faith, and I am disgusted and disappointed with so many others. I live in Utah, so I'm a minority. And there are things about my neighbors I love, and there's things about my neighbors that make me shake my head. So, yeah. And you say I'm a believer. That's interesting. I don't know how much I would say that. It's just not a phrase I would use a lot. But, I always wish I could pick on who goes to hell. It's something I always caution my students about, and administrators sometimes, parents, especially the helicopter parents we have who drove me out of education. They pick a 10, 15 second event from 186 days and decide whether or not you're a good person. I always tell people, if there is a St. Peter's and the Pearly Gate, or there's a judgment in any faith tradition, I always hope I get to pick my best events in my life. I hope it's not my worst enemy who gets to pick the events they look over. So yeah, that's what I believe. I think the best book to understand the way I am is Thomas Cahill's book, How the Irish Saved Civilization. I found that book in many parts to explain kind of my vision of the universe. It's very difficult to be a religious person nowadays. It's like the people who run churches are going out of their way to push people out the doors. And I have so many stories of my church locally that just are difficult. The important thing is I constantly have to remind myself that the guy who we like to think started this whole thing hung around with the poor, the ill, the injured, and told us that it's how we treat the dispossessed is how we'll be judged. So when I listen to that guy, when I read what that guy said, I always feel a little bit better about my place on this planet. Josh, it's a tough question for me to answer. I'll probably lose listeners because of that. And it's funny to say that out loud, but it's absolutely true. I will have people who will no longer, they will probably get rid of me on Instagram, probably stop listening on YouTube because of my faith tradition. And that's just the reality of it, Josh. But thank you for asking.